Yo, 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 what is up? What is up, libertarian family? How's it going, guys? It is Key right here. Alright, let's get right into it, man. We're gonna be talking about, you know, a pretty controversial topic, but, for today's topic, even though that it's, very early in the morning, I fell asleep for a good 6, 7 hours. So, I'm still gonna feel tired because I'm still having to get ready for work soon. But yeah, let's talk about it. Was Nat Turner's slave rebellion justified? This is a very debatable topic, and it is very difficult to try to dispute against something like this or even support anything like this because it's a double-edged sword to talk about the inconsistent nature of political violence done to individuals that don't deserve it, and therefore it creates a massive distinguished nature of being very, very detached from human reality. So, yeah, let's break this down and I will give you my take on this. So, for those of you that don't know Nat Turner, he was a former U.S. slave that ended up rebelling against multiple colonial, societies that he ended up raiding. What ended up happening with him was that he was born into a slave family, and I believe most likely, like any other African ancestor, his family was probably brutally brought into the U.S. with poor working conditions, not having the ability to be free to do whatever he wanted, and he basically was not doing anything successful as he got older. Um, the biggest issue with Nat was that he was not a very educated individual, as many would say. Africans were educated by the Bible in America while they were slaves. And the truth behind that is that, yes, a lot of African slaves in America were, they were raised by the Bible because the Bible is supposed to make a slave contingent of being obedient to the master, in which the Bible basically creates this weird cognitive dissonance of you being soft and very vulnerable and very docile to your master, in which any believer of God that follows the actual word of Jesus Christ, even though I'm not a Christian anymore, I'm a full blown atheist, but anybody who actually studies Christianity and understands what Jesus Christ's view on slavery, or any means of true Christian values at all, is that you're not supposed to enslave your own brother. You're supposed to uplift your your common man and make people as equal next to you. And that's what Jesus really imposed as far as his philosophy went, to say that why do we need to be enslaving one another when we can be together and we can reach self-righteousness, together. Because that's the biggest issue that a lot of these Christian tribes ended up going to war over, was mainly due to misconstruing what the Bible meant, and therefore they utilize a lot of destructive ideals that destroy their civilizations, and therefore that's what you see with the justification of slavery, leading up to this day actually, but it's more contingent in a Muslim point of view rather than a Christian point of view. Christianity has gotten away from slavery, but it still could possibly exist depending on what Christian belief system that people do practice and try to make a bunch of defenses for, to say no, slavery is fine. Catholicism, wasn't that bad, blah, blah, blah. But here's the thing, that's basically how slavery was normalized in America. The slaves, or the African slaves, were used as a chattel form of slavery, in which, when I say chattel slavery is like basically treating a slave with less respect, but you're treating them like they're some animal. And the evil behind that is that you're basically abusing the slave, and you're creating this mental distress where the slave alone knows that they are not free, but you are destroying their freedoms and you're dehumanizing them as they get older. So that's pretty much the story of Nat Turner, in an early sense of his life. Now, the violent part of who he is going to shock you. Nat Turner was not accepting his future to be a slave anymore. And what ended up happening was that Nat Turner had planned out a slave rebellion raid in which Nat Turner and a good amount of other slaves got together. And I believe, several Europeans that aided and assisted in his freedom to break loose and actually lead the rebellions. Um, he ended up, you know, causing a lot of violence and havoc on the colonial societies that were basically in his vicinity to lead, slave revolts. And he basically ended up being successful, but it then got halted and he eventually got killed for it. But I'll get to that in a minute. The whole, issue with Nat Turner was that he got poorly mistreated, but back in the day, and he was most likely never going to see light of freedom, probably at all, until he passed away. And the sad part was it was that he was just violently persecuted by so many how should I say, racist, racist individuals that held him down. And what better way than to not have anything to lose, and you only have one opportunity to seek the other side of what the other side of the opportunity of life and death. And that's where the sad part comes in, where it's gonna get really emotional to think. Yeah, to think about. I personally don't think like this, but to many that will probably look more into this, if you just do like a simple Google search of what he did, um, he ended up killing a lot of people. He ended up leading his slave rebellions, and I think this was like down in Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. That's where he was mostly enslaved for a good portion of his life. But he basically ended up leading a bunch of slave revolts in the South, and he was successful in a good amount of them. He killed a lot of colonial statesmen. He killed a lot of women, and unfortunately, he killed a bunch of children, in which I do not support that, and I think that was very, very stupid of him to go that far. And I'll give my thoughts on it, but after he was successful, he then got halted by, by other resisting forces in the Confederate South, in which, well, I don't know when he did these revolts. I think this is before the American Civil War. I'm gonna probably say that was way before the American Civil War. But Nat Turner was not going through a good moment in his life at all. And he basically did what he did because it was psychologically traumatic. And that was something that he was never going to be happy with for the rest of his life. and he probably most likely did not have any, family members that he could have, expanded to, and he probably was never going to experience a better future for his future children to look at him to say, that's somebody that, that I can look up to. No. But yeah, after his crimes got taken down. Well, I wouldn't say crimes, but after his actions got halted by by the colonial militaries at the time in the U.S. that stopped his slave rebellions and basically killed off his forces. Nat Turner eventually got executed, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was by a firing squad, if I'm not mistaken. He basically got killed. Very, very, very disgusting. In a bad manner. And what ended up happening was that the aftermath of it was that Nat Turner was considered to be a savage criminal of his own will, of going after the whites that he had brutally murdered. And he's considered to be a kind of like a pseudo abolitionist type hero, where people would say like he's not a hero, and he was technically a bad figure of of American history. So let me kind of make a parallel story to this, and then I'll give my concluding thoughts. A parallel figure in which Nat Turner could very well have a similar conversation with would be a woman by the name of Hannah Duston. For those of you that don't know who she is, she was like a woman that lived in the colonial southern USA, down in South Carolina. This is, way before South Carolina ever became a state, but she lived in the colony of where South Carolina was being developed. What ended up happening was that she had a kid, if I'm not mistaken, with her husband, and I think I want to say she had like a daughter too. I could be right on that, but the thing was is that she had like another newborn that she had birthed, and she was in her 40s. She was thinking life was going to be fine, but unfortunately the issue of the matter was that at this time in South Carolina was going through massive colonial wars with the American Indians, which a lot of them were the Abenaki tribe, Indian members. Those Indians outnumbered the white um, you know, colonial forces, right? Where they basically had the ability to take them down, and they were initiating a bunch of raids. They were doing a lot of really evil things to kidnap European women or even kidnap children, and I'm pretty sure they did evil things as far as killing them and doing a lot of stupid shit in which I personally do believe now, in my own point of view, that a lot of American Indian tribes were very vigilant for no reason, and they failed to be peaceful or to even make any proper changes with the European societies, and it's pretty sad because it's like don't get it twisted. Like there were peaceful tribes in American Indian cultures, but the issue of the manner was that, as you seen it within historical textbooks, at government schools, they don't teach you the ethics of what these tribes were doing, and people try to shrug over it to think that these tribes did not do a lot of heinous crimes, but a lot of them did, and they never got held, accountable for it until they probably started pushing their strings of power, and therefore they ended up paying, the price for it. Now, let's just talk about Duston's story, and then I'll correlate it to Nat Turner and then conclude. But the Abenaki tribe was very violent. South Carolina was not going through a good moment of that history. And Hannah Duston had her baby with her husband, and I think she had a daughter, if I'm not mistaken. But basically, what ended up happening was that throughout her life, she was trying to basically live, in a she was trying to like live her life, and she unfortunately got kidnapped in at some point of her time frame where I believe her husband wasn't her husband wasn't around, and I think she was with her child. And then what ended up happening was that she got kidnapped along with her child, and I think another woman got kidnapped with her. And what ended up happening was that the Abenaki tribe took her kid and unfortunately killed her child. So she got psychologically destroyed by it, in which her child died right in front of her, and rightfully so, any sane human being would want to kill the individuals that killed your child. And you would be like, bro, I'm not fucking like around. Like, I will kill you if you put hands on my family members or even take anybody's life away. So that's pretty much how it went down. Hannah, she pretty much got captured and enslaved, which I don't want to say enslaved, but it was most likely captured at a Indian prisoner hideout of the Abenaki tribe. And what ended up happening was that Hannah, she tactically played it very smart, where she ended up finding a way out to sneak her way out of the hideout prisoner zone. And what ended up happening was that there was like a bunch of children and I guess like other tribal members, in which I would assume it was like I think it was like maybe like a mix of men, women, and children combined. So I think what she ended up doing is that she probably ended up freeing the other person with her. That could have been her daughter, if I'm not mistaken. But I know that there was like certain historical images that showed that Hannah and the other person, basically another woman was with her, where she wanted to get revenge, but at the same time she needed to leave because she didn't know how many of these tribal members were out there doing what they were going to do. So basically, she ended up taking a tomahawk axe, and she ended up killing everybody that was inside the tent environment, if I'm not mistaken. I guess at the hut that she was in. And yeah, she basically killed a bunch of men. I think she killed women, and I believe she killed children too. I was not liking, the fact that she started killing the children. I understand why she probably did that, because she was like, okay, if you kill my child, then why should your children live? Like, your children should understand the concept of death too. So either way, it was basically like a blood debt payment that she wanted to do, and she ended up succeeding with the other woman that was with her, if I'm not mistaken. And what ended up happening was that she got on a canoe, if I'm not mistaken, and she basically sailed back to her colony that she was staying in South Carolina. And I'm not so sure what happened. I'm pretty sure her husband either got killed or he probably lived throughout the colonial expedition wars that were going on in South Carolina between the Indians and the Europeans. So what ended up happening with Hannah was that she was basically awarded basically money for her kidnap attempt that had been applied to her, but for the Indians that she ended up killing, as a sign of vengeance against them. And yeah, I mean, honestly, it wasn't much of a of a easy task for her to do that, because she is a woman, and women are are not as strong as men, but she was able to pull it off, and good enough she managed to get her get back to basically kill the killers that killed her children, and she probably ended up killing everybody else that was in the in the vicinity. But yeah, let me compare that with Nat Turner, and then I'll give my final thoughts on it. Um, both sides have the same parallel story, and the thing is that if you were Nat Turner or Hannah, you would think that you would be crazy enough to do it if you were put into that situation. So the comparison is that Nat and Hannah were both in a position that they could not control, and they were both being oppressed in a way where they never asked to be put in that position. Now, the real question that I would ask you is that would you do this type of action in order to basically regain your freedoms and to gain vengeance on the people that have done wrong to you? And personally, for me, I would say yes. Why would I say yes? It's because of one thing, and it's the only thing that matters in libertarian philosophy, and that is the non-aggression principle. See, now the NAP is not always consistent as in terms of what is true ethics and principles, to the smallest, atom, as far as the realm of axiomatic principles and ethics. But one thing's for sure and one thing's for certain is that we as humans have certain measures of what is considered right and wrong. And the issue that is seen between Nat and Hannah is that they both were put in a position where they did not want to be put in that position at all. They were suffering mentally and physically, where they were looking at the picture and they were like, why do I need to live my life like this and think I cannot do something to fight back? And rightfully so, they thought inside their mind, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to do something that people would think I'm a criminal for. But when you look at the end goal and the picture, you understood what they did was in response to something that happened to them. See, now with Nat, I can definitely say what he did was very justified, except for killing, innocent children. And I'm not so sure about what the women. I would probably say the women probably deserved it too. But here's the thing of why I would say that. I don't justify killing children. That's never something that libertarians should ever be saying. And the issue of the matter is that when you look at the final picture, you understand that what is considered to be right and wrong is by the choices of mankind dealt with in a ethical manner. So with Nat, what he ended up doing was that he ended up doing something where he was like, I can't live like this anymore, but I'm not going to go down like this. I'm not going to be remembered as a slave and think that I can't do something better to get away from this. And that he did. He ended up killing the colonial enslavers that probably were totally fine having their family raised around slavery. And he was like, you know what, fuck you. Why can you live lavishly as much as you want, but I can't live properly myself, where I'm basically treated like a homeless man, but with just shitty living conditions, where you're not given any proper means of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And sadly enough, it was just a depressing situation where Nat was like, I'm not going to go down like this, and I'm not going to be remembered in American history to be looked down upon as some slave that's being put inside like a museum. And it's like, it's basically life or death. and it's like he basically chose the path of he chose the path of taking dangerous risk to gain the freedom of him finding a better way out, where he knew that the end road was not going to be peaceful. He most likely would have ended up dying, and that he did, but he knew that he relieved his pain that was eating him alive. And same thing with Hannah. She never wanted that at all. And I'm sure that she was never in favor of what the colonial, armies were doing at the time in America. Because at that time, colonial militaries were very, very destructive, and they were not helping society as society was becoming less free. And the only thing that freed the United States at all, along with Canada and I probably say minus like the Caribbean and the South American continent, that was all through free markets. Obviously, South America and the Caribbean, they're not doing good after colonial wars, but you can see that the progression of their society is getting better through the means of producing more incentive to give people, a better chance to achieve freedom a lot faster in terms of decentralizing society more and pushing towards a more prosperous civilization for free market expansion and to produce libertarian based ideals. But Hannah, she basically did like the same thing what Nat did, but the thing was is that she was not put in a position where she was traumatically enslaved to the point where Nat was like basically traumatized, where he was like, you know what, screw this, I'm not gonna go through this anymore, and this is something that I'm going to do to get out of this struggle, to get out of this psychological war that is destroying my life. And then his future family and children look up to him to be like, why did my great relative decided to stay in bondage versus him taking a risk as comparable to what Hannah did. It's the same thing. The difference is just that one was born into slavery, the other one, she was born into colonial society, but she ended up paying the price of being kidnapped and having her child get killed, and it psychologically ruined her. And she viewed, the devil, i.e., the American Indians that killed her child, as the enemy. And she's like, you know what, F you. I'm not gonna deal with you no more, because you're going to be bound to do it again if I don't do anything about it to kill your people that ended up killing my child. So that's pretty much what Nat Turner did too, because he's like looking at white people to say, why do I need to be living my life in pure fear and destruction while your people are living off of the backs of my blood and bloodline? To say, well, screw you, slave. You can stay there in the corner while we're making society better. But furthermore, society wasn't getting better. Society was actually getting worse. So, as civilization, progressed, it was progressing after slavery was over. In the U.S. and Canada, but furthermore, the prosperity in Western civilization in the North Americas, at least, it was only prospering after slavery was taken down. So, furthermore, with Nat Turner's rebellion, it was a good short-lived victory, but the end goal of what was being accomplished was to get revenge. And unfortunately, he did get executed along with several other slave member leaders. And yeah, that's what happened. I'm pretty sure his name still lives on, to the fact that the analysis of the ethics and principles behind Nat Turner was heavily revolved around what was correct at the time of being put in that situation versus of what we libertarians or anybody in political philosophy would review to be considered right and wrong out of Nat Turner's decisions. And the thing is that Nat Turner, he had no rights. He was considered property at that time. So, by the United States law at the time, he was not considered a human being to represent his rights, his liberties, and his freedoms. Versus black people that did own slaves, they were considered people. They were considered free individuals that had slaves that were passed down by many family members, and they were able to get away with that. Along with American Indians, they did the same thing. There was even times where American Indians that were mixed with white European blood were considered white people. And I believe back in the segregation era of Jim Crow in America, American Indians put down being white. And same thing with black American slaves. They would call themselves Native American or, American Indian descent of being claimed to it, but they mainly did it because they married an American Indian woman. So, I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, America has so many messed up stories, but the thing is that was Nat Turner's slave rebellion justified as Hannah Duston? Um, Honestly, I would say yes, but the unethical part of both sides was just that they ended up killing children. And the evil behind it is that if the children did not get killed, then the children would have alerted other members, and therefore you wouldn't be able to do what you were wanting to do to be successful, to get away with your vengeance of actions. Because if Nat Turner decided to leave the little children alive, and therefore the children would have been screaming, and then somebody would have had to come to their aid, and then they would have had to find out who was, who basically came into these villages or these societies and ended up killing them. At least one child that probably has good memory that was probably around at the time of the crime scene, um, they would have said, yeah, it was some, unexpected black man, that had such and such characteristics, and then, they would have, explained it eventually to the point where Nat Turner would have been, stopped, stopped, in his foot tracks, and that probably would have been the end of it a lot sooner in his life. So unfortunately, Nat Turner, he basically got killed for the quote unquote crimes that he committed, and unfortunately, that's what happened to him. He did not want to submit to colonial customs that was enforced by the European armies at the time, and he took a massive risk where he did not want to be remembered as a subservient slave. He wanted to fight for his liberty and do what he needed to do to get to the level of him not being him not being treated as an unequal human being. So slavery is just shitty anyway, and anybody who makes a defense to say Nat Turner should have been kept as a slave and there should have been legal precedents over it to make him free, that wouldn't have done anything. Because what would have ended up happening would be Nat Turner would have still been a slave, and he would have been suffering more, and he probably would have taken his own life. Because because if you think about it, Nat Turner did not want to be put in that mode of thinking because it was psychologically traumatizing. He got whipped. He got abused. I'm pretty sure he was just like, you know what? Why do I need to go through this? This is not me. this is not how my ancestors were. And you know, that, that's what triggered him to go to that level of thinking, to be like, well, F you guys, I'm not gonna go through that. So that's the same thing what Hannah Duston did, but she did it in a different manner, where she wanted to get revenge for her child getting murdered. And yeah, she did what she had to do to the Abenaki tribe. And I probably would have ended up doing that too, because it's like, you kill any of my relatives, I'm gonna end up killing your whole entire family. So, like, I mean, I like, I would never see myself doing that at all. But I would hope I never have to go through that. But yeah, it's just like, when you screw around and try to mess with me, to try to traumatize my life and make me a slave forever, that's not something I'm going to gleefully accept, because there's going to be blood spilled over it eventually. And the person that unethically aggress their ideas onto me against my consent deserves to get killed in the first place at all, because you violated the non-aggression principle and you did something that was unethically criminal. So, furthermore, when it comes down, when it all comes down to it, we cannot be saying that, Nat Turner and Hannah Duston were not influential figures, because their stories have been lived on for quite a long time, and they did this, for the sake of taking a risk. So, I mean, honestly, it's a really tough story to really break down, and it's really hard to really pick a side, because morality does come into the conversation, and that's the biggest challenge. So, yeah, yeah. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think Nat Turner's slave rebellion was justified? And do you think Hannah Duston's vengeance was justified against the Abenaki tribe? So, alright, I'll see you guys. Peace, love, liberty, happiness. Alright, I'm sorry.